Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some work that I did with my advisor, Stephanie Forrest, and our collaborator, Jennifer Rexford, over the last few months. What we tried to do is address the question of what can an autonomous system do to protect itself from prefix and subprefix hijacks with technology of today. And so researchers so far have suggested things like, well, why don't you monitor your BGP updates and try to classify certain routes as, suspicious and potentially a prefix hijack. Well, the problem with that is, what is a router supposed to do? So it's potentially a hijack. Can you drop it? Well, no, because it's only potential. It could be a completely legitimate route, and dropping it could cause reachability issues. So instead, today we're just accepting routes by default, and accepting routes that we know are most likely harmful. So pretty good BGP introduces a third option to routers, which is accept the route on a probationary period. It's accepted, and for 24 hours it's given a lower local preference. So the decision process will not choose it unless it absolutely has to. And during these 24 hours, you and your customers are protected from the route if you have an alternative viable path. And so it's an adaptive solution, it's simple, and for 24 hours you're not affected, and it's plenty of time for operators to detect the problem, verify it, and fix it. So let's look at the algorithm. You monitor your BGP update messages, and you start correlating what prefixes are associated with what origin autonomous systems. And as you receive a BGP update that has a new origin AS for a prefix, then you can say, oh, this is potentially a prefix hijack, in which case I'm going to try to delay it, and I'll lower its local preference, and for 24 hours, if it's still there afterwards, well, then maybe I'll trust it. Or in fact, I do trust it. Now let's look at subprefix hijacks. You keep a list of the prefixes you've seen recently, and if a new prefix is introduced through an update, and it's wholly contained within one of the prefixes you've used, or you've seen recently in use, then it could potentially be a subprefix hijack. And the response to this is to, for 24 hours, not use it, and instead keep forwarding your packets on to the less specific net, which you were doing anyway. And then if it's still around 24 hours later, trust it, incorporate it into your router. So let's look at an example. Here's a prefix hijack. AS1, which is green, has announced 99/8 for, let's say, months on end. And suddenly AS6 comes along and says, I am an origin AS in 99/8 as well. Well, in this scenario, ASs 2 and 3 are going to select 1, and 4, 5, and 7 will select 6. But had AS5 deployed pretty good BGP, it would have trusted AS1 for all this time, and then suddenly AS6 announces the same prefix, and it would consider that suspicious. And it would say, all right, I'll accept you provisionally, but for 24 hours, I'm going to keep routing to 1. And the side effect is the entire network routes correctly. All right, a subprefix hijack. These are a little bit more damaging. So again, AS1 is announced 99/8 for a significant period of time, and AS6 announces the exact same address space using more specific networks. And since routers forward packets along the or the longest matching prefix, everyone's going to forward their packets to 6 and skip out on 1. But again, had AS5 deployed pretty good BGP to protect itself and its customers, it would have seen these new prefixes that were subprefixes of 99/8, not trusted them, and kept on forwarding to AS1 for the 24 hours. Something interesting about this is that AS5 was acting in its own self-interest. It protected itself and its customers. However, the rest of the network received benefit from this. So what kind of deployment would you have to see of pretty good BGP in order to protect the internet as a whole? Well, we did simulations of two deployment strategies, where first we said, okay, let's randomly deploy pretty good BGP on some fraction of the internet. What's going to happen? So if we look at, let's say, a 0% deployment on our inferred topology, where that's BGP today, right? So we're looking at the top line right about here. And today, on average, half of the network is going to route to the bogus origin AS. However, and as pretty good BGP is deployed, fewer and fewer people do, and the network is safer. But that's not the best kind of deployment strategy. Since pretty good BGP protects yourself and your customers, the larger your network is, the higher the percentage of the internet you've just protected. And so if you look, let's say, just at the core autonomous systems, and deploy there first, and then add random networks after that, well, what kind of effect would you have? So we're going to define core ASs as those with, arbitrarily, at least 15 peer-to-peer links in our inferred topology. And we deploy it there first. In this case, there's only 62 out of the nearly 20,000 ASs, right? And once they've deployed, then we have 0 to 100% of random after that. So here we have 0% random, but the 62 pretty good BGP core ASs, and we see that all but 2% of the network is protected for the 24-hour period on average. And it only gets better. If we look at subprefix hijacks, then you see that, they're a little bit harder to suppress. They're more effective attacks. But again, we have really good results. Now, these hijacks have been around for nearly 10 years now, and they aren't going away on their own. So there's the canonical example of 97, where AS 7007 took down the net for 2 hours. But there's a lot of other ones. So at the last NANOG, Booth et al. Estimated that there were 26 to 95 successful hijacks just in last December. On the NANOG mailing list, I partook in an interesting discussion about Panix's /16 being stolen by Con Ed, and that was well documented by Todd Underwood. And then something I think is an interesting attack is that TTNet announced 4/8, 8/8, and 12/8, right? And Sprint and Vario carried this. This is something pretty good BGP found for me, and I haven't heard discussed anywhere else, but something that could have been prevented. So, all right, we have 24 hours now in which to verify that an attack is in fact, or a suspicious route is in fact a hijack attack. And if you don't stop it in that period of time, well, pretty good BGP will allow it to go in, accept it, and then the attack could be successful. So you need to find a way to verify attacks with low human overhead. This is actually a simple problem. Since we've slowed the progress of the attack down to the human timescale, you can actually have humans do the verification. And there are really only two entities that can, with any kind of validity, verify a route, which are the ASs having their address space stolen and the ASs doing the attack. So this is where the Internet Alert Registry comes into play. It monitors suspicious routes and tells these two parties via email about the attack. And this is not a ubiquitous deployment. It's not required. You can opt in. You just give it the IAR, your email address, and the AS numbers you would like to monitor, and you'll receive alerts as they occur. And the overhead is absolutely minimal. I monitored like 5 or 6 Tier 1 ASs on our prototype IAR for about a 10-day period, and on average they received 1 alert per day. So there have been a lot of other solutions that many of you are aware of, such as, since the beginning of prefix hijacks, SBGP. This is a solution that I would love to see come into play. I mean, full path verification is something we would all like, right? It's an ideal thing. But in the meanwhile, while people are trying to deploy it and figure out how to get through the kinks, ASs are vulnerable, and as I've shown, have been significantly affected. There's anomaly detectors, which I've discussed, that they suggest monitoring your routes, but don't have a very effective way of stopping attacks. And then there's always good practice. I mean, you should employ route filters. But the nice thing about route filters is that they protect the internet from you and your customers. It's very difficult to go the other way around. You don't know what an AS 3 hops away should announce. So to wrap things up, this is why we think pretty good BGP is a good solution that can be deployed today. It maintains autonomy. You don't need to tell anyone about your peering connections. It's incrementally deployable, and I mean truly incrementally deployable. There's no flag day, no change to protocol, and it's effective for yourself immediately upon deployment. and there's minimum operator overhead. Please see the webpage. It has our paper that's in submission and also the prototype IAR. If you're interested in receiving alerts for your AS, you can do so. And the paper also discusses a lot of other things like implementation issues and what about like possible situations where what if I change providers or I have a backup route that seldomly comes up? Does pretty good BGP interfere? The answer is no. It's in the paper. Please take a look. Thank you very much.
Matt Petak, Yahoo. I noticed that you focus on sub-prefix hijackings there. Any thoughts to supernet hijackings that spammers are using these days?
It's an interesting question. There's no reason we couldn't stop those as well. It's just that you're not actually stealing address space with a supernet. So it is true spammers can use this, but you're not stealing anyone else's traffic.
No, but if you could delay it for 24 hours, it would prevent a lot of the whack-a-mole problems.
Yes, and that's a great option.
Mohit Lad, UCLA. I had a question. So you see a new route coming up, a new AS announcing, and you delay it for 24 hours. What happens if the primary AS withdraws the route in that period?
So in that case, then the routers will select the bogus route. But this is I mean, it's pretty good BGP. It's not perfect.
Danny McPherson, I had a question. With the origin AS, what if the origin AS spoofed in the hijack prefix? Did I miss that?
Can you repeat the question?
If the origin AS is spoofed to match the legitimate AS in the hijack prefix?
So like a man-in-the-middle attack where...
No, it's if I'm going to hijack a prefix and I know that AS1 traditionally announced that prefix, well, you know, the forwarding plane has nothing to look at AS1, so if I just say it's originated from AS1 when I announce it through my AS, then doesn't it obviate?
Yes, it does. I consider that a man-in-the-middle type of attack, where I can fake the rest of my path behind me.
Well, but you're not in the middle because you're just saying that it's AS1.
Right. But it looks like you're in the middle. Right. No. This is what we're going to look at next, actually. It's a real problem, and any kind of intelligent adversary would attempt that. So what we're doing right now is stopping the most common attacks that you see today due to misconfiguration.
And then my other question actually was the alert mechanism for this, which is email, is if someone's hijacked my prefix, and maybe the prefix my mail server resides in, so there's a bit of a risk in this.
Excellent point. I highly recommend that you sign up with multiple email addresses and have access to them.
Phil Rosenthal from IS Prime. Have you considered, rather than just malicious attacks, what happens when, say some small ISP in South America leaks the entire internet to a transit that doesn't filter them?
Actually, yes, and we've caught a number of those instances, actually, with pretty good BGP. Those leaks can eat up a lot of memory and cause a lot of problems, and we don't address that today, but it is something we've considered and plan to in the future.
My main point is just that the origin AS would be correct in this case, and you really need to also consider some logic of how likely given AS paths would be.
So you tend to leak more specific nets, right? Oh, I see. Okay. This is a little thing that I didn't mention in the talk. If the leak or if the route for a sub-prefix hijack is coming or has the legitimate origin along the path, then it's not considered suspicious because it's going through a route you trust, or through an AS you trust. So a leak would not hurt you.
What I mean is more like it's not malicious at all. It's a prefix that would already be in the internet. It's just a misconfiguration. It's something that they're just announcing something to their transit that they're learning from their other transit.
But it's a sub-prefix, right?
No, it's the same prefix.
It just hadn't been announced before?
It was already announced, just in a new AS path that's, learned from one transit, announced to the other?
I guess we should talk about this offline because I still don't quite understand the question. I'm sorry.
Jared Mach, NTT America. I was going to just follow on to that and try and explain, maybe try for one more second to explain what he was talking about. Is that periodically we've seen cases where somebody has a low-speed link like a T1 or DS3 or something, and will leak a number, and will just not be filtering both of their upstreams, and one of their upstreams will break the filter, and then some better paths will be seen through some customer of some network connecting maybe two tier ones to each other or something to each other. And in that case, you would have an anomalous AS path, but you'd have sort of this new AS in the middle, which is the small, tiny customer. And I think instead of looking at just the origin, he's wondering about, have you looked at analyzing not just the origin, but what ASs typically interconnect with each other in building the entire AS path for the entire thing, and not just the origin, but do you normally see 1, 2, 3, 4, and then now it's changed to 1, 2, 5, 4.
So we don't actually look at that right now, and so that kind of problem would not affect us. But it is important to look at the whole path if you want to think about man-in-the-middle attacks, which is where we're going next.
Sandy Murphy, Sparta. I was thinking about the statement you made right at the end about backup routes, and it handles if you suddenly have to shift over to a backup route. I think this works best in a situation where operational changes of the origin AS occur, as you said, at a very human-paced time interval. But there have been studies showing that there are some ISPs or prefixes which seem to oscillate at a much more rapid rate. And I was wondering if you had given any consideration to studying behavior of prefixes over a longer time period to determine what their usual rate of change was, so that you weren't locked into a 24-hour time period.
So we're not actually locked into 24 hours because we don't lose reachability. So if your original connection drops and then a new AS is the origin, then it's the only option you have, and it's just, while it has a lower local preference, it will be used. So you can actually...
Yeah, but that presumes that the original route disappears.
Yes. If it doesn't, then you're right. You have this 24-hour problem. And is this something that happens to you guys? If so, I'd really be interested. But yeah, I'd like to look into it. That's interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
Jay, I think what Sandy's pointing out is we've learned time and time again that the internet is not static, and those things which rely on, or internet routing is not static, which rely on viewing it as static, such as we're learning about route flap damping and all these things. We continually relearn the lesson that we should be enabling more and more dynamic behavior, not counting on stable behavior. And unfortunately, I think this goes the wrong way.
I would just like to say that actually this is very dynamic and very adaptive, and while 24 hours might be significant, in general, I don't think it will cause any issues. Thank you.